production of children. End of quote. Marx wrote of private property as the root of women's oppression. So, the close alliance between feminism and communism was forged in the 19th century. In the 1840s, Marx concocted the bizarre theory, which went like this. Since working men were oppressed by capitalist economies, then women were doubly victimized by the effects of capitalism and patriarchy. This is how Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels explained it in their 1848 Communist Manifesto. I quote, "What is the present family based on? On capitalism, the acquisition of private property. The bourgeois sees in his wife nothing but an instrument of production." End of quote. It is clear from the Communist Manifesto that the plan is to do away with traditional families. That's it. Anna Kulisayov, who was born in Russia as Anna Moiseyevna Rosenstein, who was a radical Jewish revolutionary, early feminist, and later co-founder of the Italian Socialist Party, pointed out that the final goal for women must be the radical transformation of society in which even the present family structure would disappear. She said that this could not be accomplished overnight, of course, as it was, I quote her, not politic to arouse fears of the immediate destruction of the existing family structure. No, it was not good politics to let the people know what the real purpose was behind all of the propaganda called equality or liberation. The task before these early advocates of communism was to convince enough women that they were oppressed and offer them the promise of liberation so that they could be persuaded to join the fight against their oppressors. It would appear that the plan had come to fruition in the 20th century. And 156 years after publication of the Communist Manifesto, what is the verdict of history? Well, the simple fact is, over 100 million people, men and women, and even children, have been killed under regimes calling themselves communist and or socialist. Yes, it is estimated that from 1917, Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, to 1989, the collapse of Soviet Union and other communist regimes, communist governments murdered about 100 million human beings. And this is explained in great detail in a great book. It's called the Black Book of Communism, Terror, Crimes, Repression, which was published first in France and then translated into English and published in 1999 by Harvard University Press. And this figure is taken from page 4. Feminism promises liberation for women, but we should remember that communism also promised liberation, emancipation, freedom, human rights, democracy, brotherhood, and many other such shining promises. It promised to liberate workers of the world. And what workers really got from their liberators was that, for example, in March 1919, thousands of Russian strikers were thrown into the Volga River with stones tied to their necks. Communism promised paradise on earth also for peasants. And what we really got was that millions upon millions died from hunger in Russia, in Ukraine, China, and elsewhere. Communism promised human rights and triumph of universal justice. But what I found reading the Black Book of Communism just a couple of days ago, I will quote now. This is not about Russia, but about China. Among many other things, the Black Book of Communism details how the Chinese people were treated by the Maoists. Here is about how people were tortured and murdered, and I quote, "Sometimes the pieces were cooked and eaten or force-fed to members of the victim's family who were still alive and looking on." This is from the Black Book of Communism, page 471. That's how it is with communism. As I said yesterday in my short email that I sent to George and George Barris, and which I shared also with others on Pacifica's list, under communism, you get everything in packages. They can give you excellent socialized medicine, but you also get gulag. What I say is that if you want to understand the culture war of today in America, you need to appreciate the ideology, methods, and goals of radical feminism. And to understand feminism in America, you must understand Marxist philosophy and the history of the Soviet Union. Simone de Beauvoir, who was, by the way, wife of Jean-Paul Sartre, was a well-known socialist feminist with Marxist sympathies. In her famous book called The Second Sex, she lionized socialism as ideal for gender relationships. And I quote, she said, "A world where man and woman would be equal is easy to visualize, for that precisely is what the Soviet Revolution promised." And I just mentioned how those promises turned out later. No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Society should be totally different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that one. That chilling commentary comes from, again, femme socialist Simone de Beauvoir in her famous 1974 interview for the Saturday Review. So what happens when the radical feminist agenda becomes the law of the land? That is not a mere hypothetical question. It can be answered by turning the pages of history back to the tragic early days of Soviet Russia. When the Bolsheviks seized the power in 1917, they regarded the family, like every other bourgeois institution, with fierce hatred and set out with a will to destroy it. To clear the family out of the accumulated dust of the ages, we had to give it a good shake-up, and we did, declared Comrade Smidovich, who was a leading communist official at that time. Lenin faced the daunting challenge of jump-starting agricultural and industrial production, so he cast his eye on a vast untapped workforce, peasant women in Russia. Parroting the Marxist line on female oppression, Lenin incited women to action at the first All-Russia Congress of Working Women. He said, I quote, "The status of women up to now has been compared to that of a slave. Women have been tied to the home, and only socialism can save them from this." End of quote. But, as Simone de Beauvoir pointed out, many women would be tempted to go back to the old ways to tend to hearth and home. So the traditional family would need to be abolished. Lenin understood that fact as well. Destroy the family, as Lenin said, and you destroy society. Thereby, he merely repeated what Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx were saying before him. But Lenin set out to do just that, hoping that a new communist society with the state as the ultimate father could be constructed. But Lenin's and Marx's dream soon dissolved into a cruel nightmare of social chaos in Russia. In the preface to Brave New World, Aldous Huxley wrote, I quote, "As political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends correspondingly to increase, and the dictator will do well to encourage that freedom. It will help to reconcile his subjects to the servitude which is their fate." End of quote. Now, Alexandra Kollontai, the first woman in the revolutionary government of Soviet Russia, was what can be called an ultimate feminist icon. She was passionate forerunner of socialist, communist, Marxist, feminism in the 20th century. Kollontai was a key participant in the formation of the early Soviet state, becoming a commissar for public welfare in 1917-18, and later the head of the women's department. Together with Lenin's mistress Inessa Armand and Lenin's wife Nadezhda Krupskaya, she was one of the founding members of women's section of the Communist Party. In the early 1920s, Kollontai served as vice president of the International Women's Secretariat of the Communist International. As advocate for a radical sexual politics and a writer who explored those politics in her novels, Kollontai admonished men and women to discard their nostalgia for traditional family life. The family appeared in her theory as a remnant of capitalist society. In place of the old relationship between man and woman, a new one is developing. Kollontai wrote in Communism and the Family, an article published in 1920. The focus of this article is one of Kollontai's strongest convictions: the necessary obsolescence of the traditional family model. In the end of her novella, Red Love, the heroine leaves her lover by whom she is pregnant. "I don't need a man," she says to her friend. "The organization will bring it up. We'll fix up a nursery, and I will bring you over to work there. You like children too. Then it will be our baby. We'll have it in common." End of quote. Kollontai combined Marxism with an ultra-Bolshevist sexual morality. She has often, therefore, been called a propagator of free love, which is known here only since 1960s, but it was known in Russia right after the revolution. Women's liberation, which was one of Kollontai's main programs, roused the disapproval of working-class women in Russia, who felt that we have already enough troubles without weakening family ties. Her theory of non-possessive love, formed in the essay called in Russia "Дорогу крылатому эросу," which translates as "Make way for the winged eros," was disapproved even by Lenin. Of all her novels, one that was called "Three Generations" is the one that has caused the most fuss, becoming the focus for an apparent rift between Kollontai and Lenin over the, what she called, glass of water, or vodka, depending on the translation, theory of sex under socialism. In the story, Zhenya, young girl, the 18-year-old komsomolka, young communist, and mother of the truly emancipated new woman, does not think love is in any way connected with sex. She loves Lenin, she loves her mother, she loves the two men she lives with, she gets pregnant by one of them, doesn't know which one, and doesn't care. Casual physical sex, she says, and I quote, "is as meaningless as drinking a glass of water to quench one's thirst." Lenin was reputedly aghast at Kollontai and her famous theory that in communist society the satisfaction of sexual desires will be as simple and unimportant as drinking a glass of water. This new sexual life, he was reported as saying, is an extension of bourgeois brothels. Lenin noted to Clara Zetkin, the German communist leader and feminist, that this glass of water theory has made our young people mad, quite mad. But Kollontai's views on sexuality were by no means marginal or unusual among other leading Bolsheviks. Leon Trotsky, for example, held similar positions on many of these questions. Kollontai's views of the role of marriage and the family under communism were arguably more subversive and more influential on today's society than her advocacy of free love back in 1920s in Russia. As I said, Kollontai believed that, like the state, the family unit would wither away once the second stage of communism became a reality. She viewed marriage and traditional families as legacies of the oppressive, property rights-based, egoist past. The decline of marriage in early years of Soviet regime in Russia gave rise to rampant sexual debauchery. Party loyalists complained, and this was mentioned in Atlantic Monthly magazine in July of 1926. Party loyalists complained that comrades were spending too much time in love affairs, so they could not fulfill their revolutionary duties.